So you kind of touched base when you were talking about the noise management program earlier on noise surveys. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that is and how they are performed?
Of course. The Coles Notes version of what a noise survey is essentially understanding what you're up against.
Okay.
So it is getting some kind of a device, typically it's a sound level meter, and walking around and determining where your exposure is. Now, a noise survey can be as simple as using a sound level meter and determining where your hotspots are. It can also include personal dosimetry, which is something that isn't necessarily used as much as I'd like to see personally. So I think it's very valuable to actually pop a noise dosimeter onto a worker and see what it is that they're hearing throughout the course of the day, how much dose they're getting, right?
Okay.
So both of these solutions are easy enough to get your hands on. There's rental and purchase options available in the marketplace. If you want to get technical as to what a noise survey is and what needs to be done, basically it's an exposure assessment that must be done in accordance to a certain CSA standard.
Okay.
The person who conducts and interprets the exposure assessment must be defined as per OHS Code in Alberta.
Okay.
The equipment used to measure the noise exposure must also meet the requirements of the standards listed in Alberta OHS Code. So the reason why I mention that, not only does it complete the trifecta of things that you should do according to legislation, but it also makes a lot of sense when people are walking around with apps on their phones going, oh, hey, I can figure out the noise on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a start, you know. It's worth what you paid for it, which might have been nothing in the App Store, right? So
exactly,
you get a basic understanding of whether or not it's noisy, but it's not precise by any means. So using the appropriate tools to do the job, great idea. If you feel that you're in over your head, there are many firms that will offer this as a service. I know that industrial hygienists are very skilled when it comes to this topic as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that I always recommend to employers, because I think sometimes, and not always, but sometimes when employers are looking to implement new programs, it's kind of let's knock off the low-hanging fruit first. So it's like, let's do audio testing on our employees. And that's a super important part of the program. But I always say first, you should make sure that you're tailoring it to your noise exposed workers. Why spend more money or do more things, right, if it's not really necessary? So starting with that noise survey, starting with that dosimetry, and kind of building your program from there ensures that they are compliant with OHS and that they keep their program, cost effective and purposeful.
And again, if a company is following the letter of the law, what they're doing is they're doing that audiometric testing, because it's right there in legislation.
Yep.
That's almost a postmortem. And as much as it's a great value to have, you want to make sure that you don't even get to that point where you're just doing it and it's rote. You're not finding any threshold shifts. It's just something that you do.
Absolutely. Well, like you said, kind of the difference between the preventative side of things and the reactive side. Once we notice that there's a shift in the employee's hearing, you don't get that hearing back ever. There's never a going back. So they've already lost that hearing. They're already experiencing that health concern, and it's too late to take it back now. So I think that preventative side is key.
100%, Chelsea, you're right.
So let's switch gears a bit and talk about the PPE side of things. So what kinds of hearing protection are available? What are maybe some of the advantages and disadvantages of those different options?
When it comes to PPE, the world is your oyster. There's so many different manufacturers out there, so many different styles and options. The most common that you're going to find are going to be earplugs and muffs. Those are kind of the building blocks, right? From there, you have derivations where you've got reusable earplugs. Remember, we were talking about the kind that you can jam in your ear, right?
Right.
So it really does depend on what you want to have as a protection level as an employer, as well as what's most comfortable for your employees. I think what I see in the field that is most distressing is that an employer will buy one size of earplug and expect it to fit the entire crew.
Right.
So it's a little frustrating because you can't expect a giant earplug to fit in a little ear. And the inverse is true, of course, right? So you do need to have different varieties. And that doesn't mean necessarily changing brand or color. It means you're using a small plug. You've got a large plug. You've got a reusable plug. I know that muffs are a common one for some folks. Really, it depends on temperature and task when it comes to muffs. So if you're doing something hot in the summertime, sometimes muffs can be a little overbearing. Right?
Yeah, no doubt.
Really, no one size fits all. Education is absolutely key when it comes to choosing and selecting the right PPE. What you'll find when you're working with your distributor or your manufacturer partner is that they're more than happy to let you test out some different products to figure out what works best for you.
And I've seen this sometimes, right? This idea of like double protection, right? Wearing the plugs and the muffs. What's your opinion on that?
So this is kind of a tricky one because double protection is 100% necessary. You need it at, in our province of Alberta, 110 decibels or greater. Okay. So you better be double protected. But by the same token, overprotection can be a bit of an issue as well. So if you're in a low noise environment, don't double up. Make sure you're wearing the right stuff given your hazard. So AB OHS, so the Alberta OHS crew, Schedule 3, Table 2 of the code explains the classes and thresholds of hearing protection. So I would recommend that everyone Googles that, take a peek, see where you fall into things. Because if you're in an environment where there's a little bit of noise and it's enough that you need protection, but you're full-blown overprotecting, then it becomes a challenge of people pulling the hearing protection out or off going, huh? What did you say? Right? So communication is a bit of a challenge. Keep in mind that double hearing protection is a bit of a misnomer. So when we look at double protection, we're not taking a plug rated 31 and a muff rated 25 and jamming them together for, a total of 50 some odd. That's not the case at all, right? So when you're double protecting, really you're only getting an additional 3 to 5 decibels of protection beyond your primary protection, which is really fun.
Okay. Well, that is one thing as well. You kind of mentioned going back to the OHS code. I always recommend to clients because a lot of them will call up and ask, what am I supposed to do? What's the frequency? What are my responsibilities? And I do find the Alberta OHS code to be very easy to read. Section 16, I think, is the noise section. And I find it's very prescriptive. It kind of lays it out step by step what you need to do. I've looked at other provincial OHS acts and codes and even the federal stuff, and I do find Alberta to be one of the more descriptive, which is nice. I know looking at the federal one, it's like, make sure you have noise protection. Okay, what does that mean? How do I do it? So I do love that Alberta does kind of lay it out step by step. So I think that's a great resource. I keep a copy on my shelf that I go to from time to time just to double check to make sure that I'm doing things the right way.
Oh, 100%. And I think what employers need to keep in mind is, although you and I have spent many years doing what we do, there's always changes in legislation. So it's always good to go back to code. As well, if you're working with someone that is newer to industry or doesn't necessarily have the background or expertise, you might want to look into hiring one of those professionals. And Chelsea, both you and I know a lot of CRSPs, with a lot of occupational consulting firms that are advantaged in this area and willing to consult. So never hesitate to reach out, right?
Yeah, well, especially for those employers that operate in multiple provinces, because when you're in BC, when you're in Saskatchewan, you're going to fall under their acting code. So again, it's not just necessarily about having experience in Alberta, but experience with those acts and codes everywhere you work. And that can be tricky because they're not always consistent, right? Especially with the noise stuff. I know looking at the legislation here in Alberta, the recommendation for audiometric testing on a periodic basis is at least every 2 years. It used to be every year if you had an abnormal test and every 2 if you had a normal test result. But BC and Saskatchewan are just every year. So it's good to know those differences and build those into your program.
Well, and to your point, Chelsea, when you're looking at that, that's kind of the base and that's where you start.
Yeah.
You can easily step it up from there. So if you're operating in multiple jurisdictions, then obviously go with the tightest of the bunch, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Make your life simple. I have had employers who say, well, let's do this for Alberta and we'll do this for Saskatchewan. And I say that can be very difficult to manage for you and for us, trying to figure out. And then you have employees who shift to different divisions, different jobs. So I agree, sticking with the kind of the strictest requirements and just applying it across the board is probably the easiest way to manage and maybe the most effective in terms of health surveillance.
Couldn't agree more.